When Claire receives a mysterious handwritten warning in her mailbox, "Don't go near the Granger house," her curiosity ignites a chain of chilling events she never could have imagined. What begins as a quiet investigation into an abandoned home turns into a mind-bending descent into darkness, where the walls shift, the past breathes, and something ancient waits to be freed. This isn't just a haunted house story. This is about a living entity, hiding beneath the town for generations. Secrets buried in the soil begin to awaken, and once they do, they never sleep again. Are you ready to find out what lies below? The quiet town of Willow Creek, where nothing unusual ever happens. Something ancient is waiting beneath the surface, and it's been waiting a long time. Claire Matthews, a young schoolteacher known for her skepticism and love of quiet solitude, stumbles upon a strange letter in her mailbox. A yellowed envelope with no return address, no stamp, and 5 ominous words. "Don't go near the Granger house." That message should have been enough. But for Claire, it sparks a fire, curiosity, a need to understand why someone would send her such a warning. What she uncovers is more than just the ruins of a forgotten house. She enters a living nightmare, a house that shifts its halls and whispers names through the walls. A child's diary hidden in a locked room, cryptic entries about rituals and the listener. A cellar that doesn't end. And beneath it all, a door that should never be opened. This story isn't just about ghosts. It's about memory, madness, and a presence so old it predates the town itself. It's a layered journey through hallucination, lost time, and terrifying truths. What Claire discovers beneath the Granger house could change her forever, if she survives. Perfect for horror lovers who crave slow-burning suspense, vivid atmosphere, and terrifying twists. If you thought you knew haunted house stories, think again. Because this house? It doesn't want to scare you, it wants to remember you. The morning began like any other. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, dew clung to the grass like tiny diamonds, and a soft breeze whispered through the sleepy town of Willow Creek. The kind of day where nothing seemed out of place until Claire opened her mailbox. It was just past 8:00 p.m. when she stepped outside, cradling a steaming mug of coffee in both hands. Claire Matthews, 28 years old, schoolteacher, avid reader, self-proclaimed skeptic, enjoyed her morning's quiet. Her rented cottage sat at the very edge of town, where paved roads turned to gravel and neighbors were few. She liked the solitude. It gave her space to think, to breathe. The mailbox, a rusted little box on a wooden post, had always been predictably empty, except for the occasional water bill or flyer for the town's farmers' market. But today, nestled inside like a secret, was something different. An envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just her name, Claire, written in sharp, uneven letters across the front. The ink looked like it had been smudged. Rushed, maybe. She glanced up and down the road but saw no one. Only the wind stirring the branches overhead and a single crow perched on the power line, watching silently. She felt the first twinge of unease. With careful fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet of yellowed paper. There were no greetings, no explanations. Just 5 words, written in the same crooked hand. "Don't go near the Granger house." Claire stared at the message, her heart ticking faster. It didn't make sense. She hadn't thought about the Granger house in years. Most people hadn't. It was just one of those old-town legends people whispered about after a few drinks, an eyesore on the outskirts, long forgotten. But suddenly, it was at the center of her thoughts. She folded the note back up. Slower this. Time, as if by folding it more gently she might understand it better. She looked around again. Still no one. No sign of who could have left it. No footsteps in the gravel. Nothing. She slipped the paper into her jacket pocket, her mind racing now. Why her? Why now? She walked back to the house, coffee cooling in her hands, the breeze suddenly colder on her skin. The morning didn't feel so quiet anymore. Inside, she sat at the kitchen table spreading the note on the wood like a puzzle. She reread it, again and again. The message was so simple, so deliberate. Not, stay away from the Granger house. Not, be careful. Just, don't go near. As if going near was enough to matter. As if the danger started before you ever stepped inside. She suddenly remembered something her grandmother used to say when Claire was little. Some places don't stay empty. Sometimes they wait. Claire had always dismissed that as a spooky bedtime line, a bit of old-world superstition. But now, sitting alone with a warning from no one about a house everyone avoided, she wasn't so sure. Something was waiting, and somehow it had chosen her. The note stayed in Claire's pocket all day like a splinter she couldn't ignore. At work, her students' voices faded into background noise. She nodded through lessons, handed out worksheets, and stared absently at the clock as it ticked toward the final bell. But her mind wasn't in the classroom. It was circling, again and again, around 5 cryptic words and the old house they warned her about. By the time the school day ended, her curiosity had grown into something sharper, like a togue just behind her ribs. A whisper in her bones that, said, this matters, and if anyone in town would know more, it was Jake Weller. Jake had been her friend since high school, the kind of friend who collected strange stories and facts like others collected coins. Now he ran the town's library, an aging red-brick building with creaky floors, crooked shelves, and a second-floor archive that smelled like paper and secrets. Claire found him exactly where she expected, hunched behind the main desk, flipping through a faded leather-bound book. "Jake," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. He looked up and smiled. "Hey, stranger, you look like you saw a ghost." She hesitated, then reached into her coat and unfolded the note, smoothing it flat on the table between them. Jake's brow furrowed. "That's unsettling. Who gave it to you?" "No idea. It was just there, in my mailbox this morning. No stamp, no name. Just that." He picked up the note gently, as if it might tear from being stared at too hard. "The Granger house," he murmured. "Haven't heard that name in a long time." Claire leaned forward. "Tell me what you know." Jake exhaled slowly and leaned back, fingers tapping the desk. "Okay. You know the usual story. Everyone does. The Granger family moved here in the early 70s. Wealthy, reclusive, built that enormous house on the hill. People said Mr. Granger was into odd things. Books on rituals, strange symbols carved into the cellar walls, that kind of thing." Claire nodded. She remembered whispers from childhood, stories told at sleepovers, doors that slammed by themselves, a girl in the window, screams at night. "But here's what most people forget," Jake continued. "One night in 1974, the whole family disappeared. Vanished. All 5 of them. Just gone. The front door was locked from the inside. No broken windows, no signs of struggle, just nothing." Claire's voice was quiet. "And the police. They searched. For weeks. Brought in dogs, psychics, reporters, the works. But they found nothing. Not even a suitcase missing. Eventually, they called it a mystery, boarded up the place, and told the town to move on. Jake paused, his eyes distant now. But they didn't tell everything. I've seen the old reports. There were odd details. Lights in the attic days after the family vanished. Strange markings on the floor. Some sort of pattern etched into the wood. And then, years later, a group of teens broke in on a dare. Only 2 came out. 1 never spoke again. The other swore she saw the Grangers standing at the end of the hallway. Just standing. Watching. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. The library's warmth suddenly felt far away. "Have you ever been inside?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "I've stood at the gate. That was enough. Place feels wrong. Like the air changes the moment you step close. As if the house knows you're there." He handed the note back gently. "Claire, someone went out of their way to warn you. That's not something you ignore." Nodded slowly, folding the paper once more, but this time with reverence. It no longer felt like a simple message. It felt like a countdown. As she stood to leave, Jake said, "If you really want to dig deeper, start with the town records. There's an old floor plan of the Granger house in the archives." And he hesitated. "What?" Jake met her eyes. "Just be careful. Curiosity is how these stories always start, but it's never how they end." Claire gave a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Outside, the wind had picked up. It whistled through the trees, rustling the leaves like whispered voices. As she walked back to her car, the note in her pocket felt heavier than paper. It felt like a thread pulling her towards something old, something buried, something that remembered. And in the stillness of that moment, as she slid into the driver's seat, she thought, just for a second, that she heard it. A whisper. Faint and distant, like it had traveled through time just to find her. Claire. The Granger house stood at the very edge of Willow Creek, where the town gave way to dense woods and tangled underbrush. It was a place people spoke of in low voices, if at all. Most just drove faster when passing the road that led there, like something might reach out and follow them home if they lingered too long. Claire parked her car at the base of the overgrown gravel drive. Her headlights flickered for a moment, before she turned them off, swallowed by the quiet gray of dusk. A low mist clung to the ground, curling around the trees like fingers. The air smelled of wet earth and old stone. For a long moment, she just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. There it was. The Granger house. Tall and rotting behind a rusted iron gate, it looked more like a mausoleum than a home. The once white paint was now chipped and weather-beaten, peeled away like dead skin. Windows were cracked or missing entirely, gaping like black eyes in a skull. Ivy had clawed its way up the sides, wrapping around the house like it was trying to choke the life out of it. A gust of wind rattled the mailbox at the end of the driveway. Claire stepped out of the car. She hadn't told Jake she was coming. Not yet. Part of her knew he would have tried to stop her. But the warning in the note had become a challenge. In her mind, a dare she couldn't ignore. And deep down, part of her believed this wasn't random, that something wanted her to come here. The gate was slightly ajar, hanging crooked on its hinges. She pushed it open, and it groaned like it hadn't moved in years. Gravel crunched beneath her boots as she walked the path toward the porch, every step louder than it should have been. Halfway up the walkway, she paused. The front door was open. Not wide, just enough to be unnatural. Just enough to suggest that someone, or something, had gone in or come out and forgotten to close it. Her heart began to drum harder. She pulled her flashlight from her coat pocket and flicked it on. A weak, flickering beam stretched into the fading light. Shadows shifted. The porch creaked beneath her weight. Claire reached out and pushed the door slowly. It groaned open, revealing a yawning darkness beyond. She took one cautious step inside. Immediately the air changed. It was colder, heavier, like stepping underwater. The scent hit her next. Old wood, mildew, and something else beneath it. Something sour. Something wrong. Her flashlight beam danced across the grand foyer, revealing a broken chandelier hanging like a skeletal hand from the ceiling. The wallpaper was torn in long strips, revealing the crumbling bones of the house beneath. Dust floated in the air like ash. To her right, a tall staircase rose into the dark, its railing splintered and warped. Ahead of her, 2 doorways yawned, open on either side of the hall. She called out. "Hello?" Her voice echoed, then faded. Nothing answered. She moved forward. The flashlight beam caught a portrait hanging on the far wall. A family of 5 stood stiffly in front of the very house she was in. Mr. and Mrs. Granger, 2 sons and a little girl with a bow in her hair. Their eyes seemed to follow her. The glass was cracked, slicing diagonally across the mother's face. As she stared at it, Claire heard something above her. Click, a footstep, then another, slow, deliberate. She turned toward the stairs, heart hammering. Now, breath shallow. The flashlight trembled in her grip as the beam climbed the steps one by one. Another step creaked above. She counted. Someone was walking. "Jake?" she whispered, knowing it wasn't him. "Is someone up there?" No reply. Just the groaning sigh of the house settling, or breathing. She took a deep breath and forced her foot onto the first step. Then the next. Each creaked beneath her, echoing up through the house like a warning. Her flashlight flickered again. At the top, the hallway stretched out, long and narrow. Doors lined both sides, closed, waiting. Claire turned slowly, sweeping the light from left to right. One door, at the very end of the hall, was slightly ajar. Her pulse jumped. Her throat tightened. And then, as she stared at it, she saw the faintest movement. Just a sliver. Like someone pulling back from the crack in the door. Her flashlight flicked off. Pitch black. She smacked it with her palm. Once. Twice. Nothing. A low creaking sound came from the door. Then silence. She backed away, fumbling for her phone, desperate for any kind of light. The screen glowed faintly in the dark, just enough to see the hallway behind her. That's when she realized something else. The door at the other end of the hall, the one she had passed, was now open too. Claire was no longer alone. Claire stood frozen in the middle of the upstairs hallway, caught between 2 slowly opening doors, one behind her, one ahead. The air was thick with silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that watched. She gripped her phone tighter, its dim glow barely cutting through the darkness. Her flashlight, useless now, hung heavy in her other hand. A bead of sweat slipped down the side of her face despite the chill. The hallway suddenly felt longer, the shadows deeper. Claire turned back toward the door at the end, the one she had first seen slightly ajar. It was now open just enough for her to see part of the room inside. Cracked wallpaper, the edge of a desk, a sliver of a window beyond. Sheer, unmoving curtains. She swallowed hard, one foot in front of the other. The floorboards creaked beneath her like brittle bones. With each step, the door opened more, not from her hand, but on its own, inch by inch, like it was inviting her in. She reached the threshold and hesitated. The room was a study, small, square, and filled with dust that danced in the faint light drifting through the broken shutters. Books lined one wall, their spines cracked and curling. A thick layer of dust covered everything. It looked like no one had stepped inside for decades, but the strangest thing was the temperature. It was colder in here, Not just drafty, but wrong, like the cold that sinks into your bones and stays there. The kind that doesn't come from weather, but from something older. Claire stepped inside. As soon as she did, the door behind her clicked shut. She spun around, tried the handle. Locked. She jiggled it, harder now, her breath starting to fog in, the frigid air. "Come on," she whispered. "Not funny." But she was alone. At least she hoped she was. Turning back to the room, her eyes landed on the desk. It sat beneath the window like a forgotten altar, cluttered with faded papers, ink bottles, and a few melted candles. Her fingers hovered over the surface, disturbing the dust. In the center of the desk was a leather-bound book. She opened it carefully. The pages were fragile, handwritten in looping cursive. It was a diary. The name, scratched across the inside cover, made her blood run cold. Lily Granger. Claire's breath caught, the little girl from the family portrait. She flipped to the first page. March 2nd, 1974. Papa says we shouldn't go near the cellar anymore. He says the voices aren't real, but Mama hears them too. She cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep. Claire flipped to another page. March 19th. Papa drew a circle in the basement with chalk and wouldn't let us cross it. He stays down there longer every day. He talks to something when he thinks no one's listening. I think it talks back. The hairs on her neck stood up. She read faster. April 3rd. The house is changing. Mama got lost upstairs for hours. When she came back, she didn't remember where she'd been. I hear knocking in the walls now. Not like a mouse, like fingers. Another entry, short, frantic. May 1st. We can't leave. The doors won't open. The windows heal themselves. Papa says the house is awake now. It watches us. It feeds on fear. Claire turned one last page. If you're reading this, it means someone finally found me. Don't trust the house. It lies. It makes you see what it wants. Don't stay after dark. Suddenly, a sharp thump sounded from behind the bookcase. Claire jumped back. The noise came again. Thump, thump. Then a pause. Then something that sounded like a breath. A whisper she couldn't understand. She slowly approached the bookcase. Her light revealed scratch marks along the floorboards like it had been moved recently. Maybe it wasn't a wall after all, but a door. She gave it a shove. Nothing. Another shove. This time it groaned and shifted an inch. Then something fell from the top shelf, an old photograph. It fluttered to the ground, face up. Claire bent down and picked it up. It was Lily again, standing in the very room Claire was in now. Same desk, same curtains. But in the photo, something stood behind her. A figure. Tall. Shadowy. Its face smeared as if it had been deliberately blurred or erased. Claire dropped the photo, heart racing. Suddenly, her phone flickered and died. Total blackness. She heard something behind her. A soft sound. Not quite. A footstep. More like the whisper of fabric against wood. Her breath hitched. She wasn't alone. Hands trembling, she turned back toward the door, grabbed the knob, and twisted hard. Locked. Then, click, the lock turned by itself. The door creaked. Open, but the hallway outside no longer looked the same. It was longer, darker, and at the far end, a light flickered beneath a small door hidden behind torn wallpaper. A door she hadn't seen before. And it was waiting. The door at the end of the warped hallway waited like an open eye, small, square, and pulsing with faint, flickering light. Beneath it. Claire stepped out of the study, the scent of mildew and old smoke clinging to her clothes. The air out here had changed. It felt charged now, like the house had woken up and was watching her more closely. She stood motionless for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no whispers. Just the low creak of beams overhead, as if the house were exhaling. The wallpaper along the hallway was shredded, revealing wooden slats and crumbling plaster. The floor dipped in places, swollen with years of moisture. Claire walked carefully, the only sound her boots against the old floorboards. As she reached the small door, she noticed something strange. There were no hinges. The door wasn't built to open outward or inward. It looked like it slid. She reached for the edge, her fingers brushing against cold metal. A hidden groove. With a gentle push, it glided sideways into the wall with a whispering sigh. Behind it was a narrow staircase, steep and spiraling down into the dark. Claire hesitated, breath catching in her throat. This hadn't been on the floor plan Jake had shown her. Holding her breath, she descended. Each step groaned louder than the last. Dust filled the air. She could taste it, like dirt and old memories. The stairs ended in a cramped hallway lined with rotted wallpaper, lit only by the faint orange glow of a single oil lamp resting on the floor at the far end. It flickered, as if recently lit. Claire moved toward it and froze. The hallway ended at a door. Unlike the others, this one was clean. No dust, no scratches. It looked untouched. New, even. But the lock was rusted shut. She tried the handle. It turned without resistance. The door creaked open into a room that took her breath away. It was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. A 4-poster bed stood neatly made in the center, covered in a pink quilt patterned with stars. A small bookshelf lined one wall filled with children's books with titles like The Secret Garden and The Little Witch. A rocking horse sat in the corner, mid-sway, as though someone had just stepped off. The air in the room was warmer, almost inviting. Claire stepped inside and closed the door softly behind her. Her eyes moved to the nightstand beside the bed. On it was a small, ornate box. She opened it slowly, expecting dust and cobwebs, but instead it was clean, polished, waiting. Inside, wrapped in soft fabric, was a diary. Not just any diary. The diary. Its cover was cracked leather, the initials LG embossed on the front. Claire sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The first few pages were childish. Clumsy handwriting, doodles of stars and cats, mentions of birthdays and favorite songs. But the tone changed abruptly about halfway through. The letters grew tighter. The margins filled with scribbles, arrows, and underlines. The writing became frantic. May 3rd, 1974. Mama says Papa isn't himself anymore. He talks to the walls. He whispers things at night when he thinks I'm asleep. Sometimes I hear other voices answering him. May 6th, I saw the walls move today. I mean really move, like they breathed. I told Mama. She told me to pray. May 10th, something lives in the house now. I can feel it watching me. It's under the floor, in the cellar. Papa calls it the listener. Claire's skin prickled. May 13th, the doors don't open anymore. The windows won't break. I think we're trapped. Papa says it's a gift. Mama says it's punishment. May 14th, there's a room that doesn't exist on the blueprints. It only appears at night. Papa goes in there and doesn't come out for hours. When he does, he looks older, tired, like something's draining him. Claire turned the page. A deep indentation marred the paper, like the pen had been pressed down hard in desperation. May 15th, I saw it today. The thing Papa talks to. It had no face, just skin, smooth like stretched wax. It stood behind him and whispered things I couldn't hear. I think it saw me. May 16th. If anyone finds this, I'm sorry. We tried. We didn't know what we were waking up. Claire's fingers shook as she turned to the final page. It was different. Clean. Measured. A calmness to the handwriting that was more chilling than any panic. May the 17th. The listener is no longer in. The walls. It's in the house, and soon it will be everywhere. I made a key. It's hidden in the locket Mama gave me. If you find this, use it. But only if you're ready to see the truth. Claire sat in silence, the weight of the diary sinking in. She felt like she'd just read a confession, or a warning wrapped in a child's desperation. She looked around the room again. Where was the locket? She stood and moved to the bookshelf, checked behind it, under the bed. The rocking horse creaked softly behind her, and she spun. Nothing. Then she saw it, hanging from a nail above the headboard, a delicate silver chain, a heart-shaped locket. Claire climbed onto the bed and reached for it. As her fingers brushed the cold metal, the oil lamp flickered wildly, and then, all at once, she heard it, a whisper, low, raspy, right next to her ear. Claire. She froze. Every hair on her body stood on end. Her breath hitched. Then, silence. She grabbed the locket and turned to run, but the door to the hallway slammed shut before she could reach it. She was alone, locked in Lily Granger's room, with something just outside the door, and it knew her name. The silence inside Lily's room wasn't calm. It was pressurized, like the eye of a storm. Claire stood frozen near the door, the silver locket clenched. In her fist, the weight of its secret key digging into her palm. Her heart pounded against her ribs in wild, uneven beats, as if trying to warn her of something she couldn't yet see. She stared at the closed door. No footsteps, no whispering now. Just that heavy, unnatural stillness. With trembling hands, Claire turned the doorknob. It resisted for a moment, then gave way with a reluctant click. She opened the door slowly, half expecting something to be waiting for her on the other side. But the hallway was empty. Long, quiet, dim. Except it was wrong again. The walls looked different, older, like the house had aged another 50 years, in the span of a few minutes. Paint peeled in long strips, floorboards warped upward like the spine of some great dead animal. The ceiling sagged. The whole place smelled stronger now. Wet rot and something metallic, sharp and bitter. Claire stepped into the hall, clutching the locket tightly. She had to get out, but the house had no intention of letting her go. Every hallway seemed longer than it had before, bending subtly, the corners receding as she approached them. Doors she'd passed earlier were now missing, replaced with blank walls or sealed tight as coffins. She tried retracing her steps, but the layout of the house shifted beneath her feet, impossible and unreal. Then, something changed. A draft, cold and rising from below. The cellar. She turned the next corner and found it, a narrow stairwell tucked behind a torn curtain, almost invisible in the dim light. Claire had walked past this spot before, but the stairs hadn't been there then. She descended. The wooden steps groaned with every movement. Dust and cobwebs clung to her as she made her way downward, the air growing colder with each step. By the time she reached the bottom, she could see, her breath clouding in front of her. A heavy wooden door stood at the base of the stairs, thick, iron-banded and ancient. Symbols were carved into its surface, half-faded, but still legible enough to feel intentional. Spirals, eyes, circles, something deeper than decoration. She reached for the rusted handle, then stopped. The locket. Claire opened it. The little silver key nestled inside caught the dim light like a glint of a star. She slid it into the keyhole on the door. It fit perfectly. As it turned, the symbols on the door shifted, groaning like old metal. The door unlocked with a sound like an exhale. She pulled it open. What lay beyond didn't feel like a cellar. It felt like a threshold. The room was circular, much wider than it should have been, far too large to fit beneath the foundation of the house. The walls were stone, ancient and uneven, with deep cracks running like veins through the rock. Strange markings covered every surface, some painted in dark ink, others carved directly into the stone. The air here wasn't just cold, it hummed, low and alive, as if the walls themselves were vibrating. In the center of the room was a circle of chalk surrounded by melted candles and strange talismans. Bones lay scattered just outside the ring, small ones, not animal. Claire stepped inside, her boots crunching on the salt sprinkled around the perimeter. The second she crossed the circle's outer edge, the hum in the air deepened, resonating in her chest. At the far end of the room was a second altar, low and square, made of stone, stained with something long dried. On it rested a torn, leather-bound book. She moved closer. The book's title was scrawled in ink along the spine, The Listener's Covenant. Claire opened it with cautious hands, diagrams, rituals, incantations written in Latin, and, beneath them, scribbled annotations in Mr. Granger's frantic handwriting. We thought it was just a voice, but it sees us. It doesn't want worship, it wants residence. The house is no longer ours. It belongs to him now. Suddenly, a sound echoed behind her, a sharp wooden snap like a board breaking under pressure. She spun around. Nothing. But the chalk circle was different now. Smudged, broken, and then, from the shadows, movement. Something, long, thin, like a limb made of smoke. It slid along the wall just out of reach of the flickering candlelight, dragging itself across the stone like it had no bones. A voice followed, low and guttural. Not a whisper this time. A language she didn't know, spoken with venom and rhythm, echoing off the walls. Claire backed away from the altar. She had seen enough. She turned, heart hammering, and ran back toward the stairs. But the passage had closed. The door was gone, vanished. In its place was solid stone, smooth and seamless, trapped. The hum grew louder. The stones vibrated. She clutched the locket again. The key. There had to be another way out. There had to be. Then she remembered something from Lily's diary. The house lies. It makes you see what it wants. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes. Don't trust the room. Don't trust the fear. And when she opened her eyes again, the wall with the missing door shimmered slightly. Not a lot, but enough. A shimmer like heat over pavement. She stepped toward it, hand outstretched. Her fingers sank through the stone, like it wasn't stone at all, just illusion. Claire didn't hesitate. She stepped through, and as she did, something hissed behind her. A sound of fury, of frustration, like a predator losing its prey. She emerged back into the hallway, gasping, chest heaving. The cellar had let her go, but only because she had refused to believe in its lies. And somewhere in the dark behind her, The house shifted again. Waiting. Watching. Learning. Claire stumbled through the illusionary wall, falling hard against the warped floorboards of the hallway. Her palms scraped wood, and for a breathless moment she simply lay there, her cheek pressed. To the cold floor, the world spinning around her. She had crossed back, out of the cellar. But something had followed her. Not a creature, at least not one that could be seen, but a presence. Thick and clinging, like cobwebs wrapped around her skin. She could feel it, breathing just behind her, listening. She sat up slowly, the silver locket swinging from her neck now, its little hidden key warm against her chest. The warmth felt unnatural, like it had absorbed something in that chamber of stone and bones. The house was silent again, too silent. Not peaceful. Expectant. The floorboards beneath her vibrated slightly like the slow thrum of a heartbeat. The wallpaper on the walls now looked wet, like it had been sweating, and the shadows in the corners twitched and lingered, reluctant to stay still. Claire pulled herself up and gripped the banister. She had one thought in her mind now. Get out the front door, if she could find it again. If it was still real. She descended the stairs carefully, every creak underfoot sounding like a warning shot in the stillness. When she reached the foyer, she paused. The air was thicker down here, the smell of decay, stronger, almost suffocating. The chandelier overhead swayed gently, though there was no wind. Her flashlight, dead hours ago, hung useless at her side, but the locket glowed faintly in the gloom. The front door stood ahead of her. It looked real, but she didn't trust it. The house had shown her what it could do, twisting space, altering reality, trapping people not just physically but mentally. Claire knew now that leaving wasn't about walking out the front door. It was about understanding what had taken hold inside this place. She turned from the door. The house hadn't brought her here by accident. There was something she still needed to see, and then she heard it again. That voice. Only now, it wasn't whispering. It was calling. Not words, not language, just sound, ancient and cold. It came from beneath the floorboards, deeper than the cellar, lower. Claire followed it without thinking, her mind drawn like metal to a magnet. The hallway stretched out ahead, unfamiliar again. The wallpaper was gone now, replaced by raw, breathing wood. The floor felt soft in places, pulsing beneath her steps. Eventually, she reached the end. A door stood there, larger than the others, carved from black wood that shimmered in a way nothing else in the house did. The symbols on its surface were carved deep, filled with a tar-like substance that glistened wet in the low light. There was no handle. But the key, the one from the locket, gleamed brighter now. It wanted to be used. Claire pressed the key into the dark wood. There was no lock. But the moment it touched the surface, the door opened inward, soundlessly, revealing a staircase that descended into a space darker than night. She hesitated only once, then stepped inside. The air here was wrong. It wasn't just cold. It was void. No sound, no echo, no breath. The only thing Claire could hear was her own heartbeat and the faint hum of the key against her chest. Down and down she went. Stone walls closed in tighter. The steps felt endless. And finally, she reached it. A vast underground chamber. It wasn't made of stone or brick, but something older, smoother. The walls were pulsing like the inside of a living thing, veined and dark, like she was standing in the belly of a buried beast. And in the center of the room, it stood, the listener. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth, no expression, just a tall, humanoid shape made of stretched skin and shadow, its surface rippling slowly like the surface of a pond in the wind. It didn't move, didn't breathe. But Claire felt it seeing her, not with eyes, but with something. Older, deeper, her thoughts trembled, scattered like leaves in wind. Her knees buckled, and then it spoke. Not with a voice, with a presence. It poured into her mind like oil, thick and heavy. Visions flashed across her eyes. Mr. Granger on his knees, weeping at the altar, whispering promises in blood. The family bound to the house by invisible chains, unable to leave, unable to die. Lily, screaming in her room as the walls bent around her, her diary the only scream that escaped. Claire gasped, dropping to the floor, her hands pressed to her temples. "Why me?" she choked. No answer, just one feeling. You came. You opened the door. Now you carry it, and she understood. The note wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. Claire had been chosen, not randomly, but by the house itself, or rather by what lay below. Something had awakened. Something that couldn't step into the world unless someone made the path, unless someone willingly entered, and now she was marked. The locket around her neck burned hot. She reached up, yanked it off, and hurled it into the dark. The listener reacted, flinched. Its form rippled violently, twisting in on itself. That was the key. The locket was the tether, and destroying it could sever the connection. Claire scrambled to her feet and ran, back up the stairs. The chamber behind her shook, groaning like the earth itself was wounded. Shadows chased her, clawing at the edges of the tunnel. She ran faster, burst through the black door, slamming it shut behind her, and the house was screaming. Walls shook. Paint peeled in great sheets. Windows shattered, but Claire didn't stop. Down the hallway, through the twisting foyer, toward the front door that now glowed like fire. She grabbed the knob and turned it, and this time, the door opened. Real air hit her face, cold, fresh, alive, stumbled into the night, the house howling behind her, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, silence. The door creaked closed on its own. Claire stood on the gravel path, bathed in moonlight. The house behind her was still again. No screams, no movement, but she knew. It wasn't over. The listener hadn't died. It had simply receded. And now it knew her name. The next morning, the sky over Willow Creek was gray and low, as if the clouds themselves had grown heavy with secrets. Rain threatened the horizon, but none fell. The air felt paused, like the town was holding its breath. Claire hadn't slept. After escaping the house, if escaping was even the right word, she had driven through the night. Headlights, cutting through the empty roads like knives. Her mind was a swirl of shadow and memory. She could still feel the house behind her, reaching, even from miles away. Watching. She parked outside Jake's house just after sunrise. The porch light was still on. He opened the door in sweatpants and a hoodie, rubbing his eyes. Claire. She didn't say a word, just held up the diary and the locket, now blackened and cracked down the center. Jake's eyes widened. He stepped aside without another question. Inside, Claire sat at his kitchen table, a steaming mug untouched in front of her. The diary lay open between them, its pages curling at the edges like they were trying to fold back in on themselves. Udine went inside, Claire said at last. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. I found her room, the cellar, something else, something beneath. Jake listened in stunned silence as she told him everything. Lily's words, the chanting, stone chamber, the listener, the visions, the smell, the feeling, the thing without a face. By the time she was done, the silence in the room was a presence all its own. Jake swallowed hard. "I don't think you were supposed to get out." Claire looked up. "I don't think I did." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She turned the locket over in her hands. "The house chose me. It's been waiting. And I know. This didn't start with the Grangers. It's older, deeper." Jake stood, walked to the other room, and returned a moment later with a manila folder marked Willow Creek, Historical Zoning Files. Inside were maps, newspaper clippings, and photographs, most yellowed with age. "I started digging after you left," he said. "Did you know there was a settlement here before? Willow Creek? In the 1800s. It was called Ashwood." Claire leaned in. Jake spread out a worn map. Ashwood was a mining town, but the mine collapsed. The story goes that the ground just gave out, swallowed the whole site. Dozens dead. They blamed unstable rock, but locals said something was down there, something the miners unearthed that should have stayed buried. He pulled out a brittle newspaper clipping. "Mass exodus from Ashwood after unnatural events. Local pastor claims land is marked." Jake tapped it. "After the collapse, survivors abandoned the town. Years passed. Then, in the 1950s, a land development company bought the area and built Willow Creek. Guess what was built right on top of the old mine?" Claire didn't need to guess. "The Granger house," she whispered. Jake nodded. "Right over the deepest part of the shaft. They never knew." Claire's skin prickled. The visions, the voices, the listener. It had been there long before the Grangers. The house hadn't made it. It had grown around it, like a shell around a parasite. "They weren't cursed," she said softly. "They were used." Jake's expression darkened. "And now it's growing restless again. Maybe it always does. Every few decades it calls to someone. A key, a doorway." Claire looked down at the cracked locket in her palm, and I answered. She stood, heart pounding. "We have to destroy it." Jake shook his head. "Claire, if it's ancient, if it's been feeding off people for a century, what makes you think we can?" She met his eyes. "Because Lily tried. She was a child, alone. But she still tried. She reached for the diary. I'm not a child, and I'm not alone." Jake stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, where do we start?" Claire turned to the last page of Lily's diary. Hidden behind the back cover, in pencil so faint it was almost invisible, were 3 words. "It lives below." And then, scrawled in hurried script, "There's a second altar." Claire traced the words with her fingers. "Lily couldn't find it," she murmured. "But maybe we can." She closed the diary, the pages whispering like dry leaves. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. And somewhere beneath the Granger house, in the soil that had never forgotten, something stirred. Claire stood once more at the edge of the Granger property, the trees looming overhead like sentinels. There, bare limbs clawing at the sky. The sun was low now, an ember caught in the branches, casting long shadows that crawled across the ground like warning signs. The house loomed ahead. It looked the same, and yet different. As if it remembered her, she tightened her grip on Lily's diary. The cracked locket, its key, long discarded, now hung from a leather cord around her wrist like a talisman. Jake stood beside her, a heavy flashlight in one hand, a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Inside, the bag, candles, salt, chalk, and pages torn from the listener's covenant, the ritual book Claire had found beneath the house. They had a plan, but they also had doubts. "You're sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice low. "No," Claire replied, "but I'm done running." Together, they crossed the threshold. The house greeted them with silence. No wind, no whispers, just that same pressure, like they'd stepped inside a sealed box. The air was stale, layered with rot and something older than time itself. Claire led the way. She knew where to go now, not back to the cellar, deeper. The house no longer resisted. It wanted them to come. Doors that had once vanished now reappeared. Hallways that had twisted impossibly now led exactly where they needed to go. That, somehow, was worse. They descended 2 levels, past the false basement, beyond the illusionary walls. Claire found the hidden door again, the one carved from black wood, veined with dark symbols, and pressed her palm against it. It opened without sound. As they entered the stone corridor beyond, Jake lit the lantern. Its glow flickered over the damp walls, revealing old markings. Writings even older than the house, older than ashwood, older than language. They pulsed faintly, as if reacting to their presence. At the end of the tunnel, the chamber opened up. Claire froze. This wasn't the place she had seen before. This chamber was larger, colder. The very air shivered, vibrating with an unnatural rhythm like the beating of a massive heart. It wasn't made of stone, but of something organic. Flesh-like walls that pulsed and shuddered with every breath she took, and in the center stood the altar. The final altar. It was not man-made. It rose from the floor like a growth, a jagged spire of bone and obsidian fused together, reaching toward. The ceiling like a broken tooth. Symbols spiraled across its surface, writhing when touched by light. Coiled around it were the skeletal remains of those who had tried, and failed, to end the curse before her. Claire stepped forward, heart hammering. "Here," she said. "This is where it began, and where it would end." Jake moved quickly, drawing a protective circle in chalk and salt, placing candles at the cardinal points. Claire opened the diary to the final pages and recited the rites written in Lily's last desperate scrawl. "Speak not the name. Look not into its face, but mark the circle and bind the will." The walls trembled. A sound rose from beneath the altar, deep, guttural, like something waking from the bottom of the world. Claire's voice rose over the noise. She shouted the incantation from the covenant pages, words that burned her throat as they passed through her lips. The circle flared, to life, glowing red, then white, then a violent, searing gold. The altar screamed, not with sound, but with memory. A flood of voices poured into the chamber. "He took our names. It wears our faces. We gave it blood, and it gave us nothing. Run, before it sees you," Jake cried out, falling to his knees, clutching his head. Claire held firm. The final passage. The final words. She stared at the altar and screamed the last line. "This is not your world!" The altar exploded in light. A pulse blasted outward. Walls cracked. Bones shattered. The candle flames surged skyward, then extinguished in a burst of smoke. The listener appeared. Not a body, but a shadow so dark it absorbed the light. It rose above them, faceless and featureless. A void made flesh, taller than the room should have allowed. And then, it reached for her. Claire didn't move. She couldn't. Her feet were frozen to the floor. The circle around her cracked, the salt blowing away like ash in wind. The listener's tendril neared her chest, hovering inches above her heart, and stopped. It looked at her, not with eyes, but with recognition. Then a child's voice whispered, behind her ear. "Run!" Claire gasped. Lily. The light returned, blazing from the diary itself. Pages turned by an invisible hand. The glow intensified, pressing the shadow backward. The listener shrieked, a sound of loss, and then it folded into itself like a collapsing star. The chamber went still. Claire dropped to her knees, breath ragged, skin slick with sweat. The diary lay open beside her, its pages now blank, white and clean. Jake stirred, coughing. "Is it gone?" Claire looked around. The walls were crumbling, losing shape. The organic flesh sloughed away like melting wax. The altar cracked down the center and collapsed into dust. She stood. "It's not gone," she whispered. "But it's been pushed back. Bound. For now." They moved quickly, back through the tunnels, up through the bones of the house. By the time they reached the front door, the house had begun to groan. The walls warped, windows shattered. They stepped outside just as the roof began to buckle, and with a deep, sighing exhale, the house collapsed. Dust filled the air. Silence. No screams, just stillness. And buried beneath the rubble, the final door was closed. 3 weeks passed. The ruins of the Granger house were cleared within days, hauled away by construction crews who worked in silence, the way people do when they don't want to ask too many questions. Officially, the house had collapsed due to structural instability. Unofficially, no one in Willow Creek spoke about it. No one wanted to. Some houses leave behind dust. This one left behind a silence. Claire sat on a park bench across the street from the empty lot where the Granger house once stood. A plastic orange fence marked off the area, flapping in the wind like tattered warning tape. Nature was already reclaiming the space. Grass growing through cracks. Crows circling the treetops. The town wanted to move on, but the ground remembered. She could feel it, even now. The soil wasn't done holding things. Jake joined her with 2 coffees, handing one over without a word. They sat for a while, watching the breeze stir fallen leaves around the fence. "Still nothing in the papers," he said. "No one asking questions. It's like it never happened." Claire gave a small, tired smile. "That's what it wants, to be forgotten. That's how it waits." Jake looked at her. "You don't think it's over, do you?" She shook her head. "I think we slowed it down, maybe sealed it. But something like that, you don't kill it, you just buy time." He nodded quietly. "And if it wakes up again?" She sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on the empty lot. "Then someone else will hear the whisper." Jake studied her for a moment. "You okay?" Claire didn't answer right away. At night, she still woke with a jolt, heart racing, drenched in sweat. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps in her hallway. Sometimes the mirrors in her house showed shadows that didn't belong. And sometimes, just before falling asleep, she'd hear a child's voice, whispering. "Run." "Yeah," she lied softly. "I'm okay." She looked down at the book in her lap. Lily's diary, its pages now filled with blank parchment. But sometimes, in the right light, she thought she could see words swimming faintly beneath the surface. Like they hadn't disappeared, just gone dormant. She kept the diary close. Not to remember what happened, but in case it ever started again. Because one thing had become clear. The listener didn't live in the house. It was the house. And while the walls were gone, walls can be rebuilt. And deep below the earth, beneath roots and rock and time, something still turned in its sleep. Claire stood, coffee in hand, diary pressed against her chest. Jake followed. As they walked away, the wind picked up behind them, rattling the fence, stirring the trees. And if you listened closely, very closely, you might have heard it. A breath, a whisper, a voice just beneath hearing, calling a name that hadn't been spoken aloud in decades. Claire. The end, or maybe just a pause. Subscribe now and turn on notifications for more haunting, cinematic horror stories that pull you into the darkness. If this story chilled you, like, share, and drop a comment below. Tell us what part gave you goosebumps, and if you dare, tell us what you would have done if the note had been in your mailbox.